Hey everybody, before we get started, just want to let you know that we are accepting submissions for the narrative portion of our podcast. In fact, we'll always be accepting submissions. This podcast was made as a way to get people's stories out there. If you have an original short story or work of fiction and want to get out there with full credit, send it to storytellercasts@gmail.com. That is storytellercasts@gmail.com. Cast with an S at the end. Once sent, one of us will read it, or if you hate our voices and think you can do better, which honestly you probably could, send in your own voice recording of the story. For more details, email us at storytellercasts@gmail.com. Once again, that is storytellercasts@gmail.com. Hi, I'm Chris Vasquez, and I will be reading Contree, written by yours truly. It sat on top of the metal frame, hunched over, taking in the colors of the burning city in front of it. The Contree did this every time it wrapped its head in a fresh white bandage. It liked to indulge before its face reddened the covering again, turning everything into a bloody hue. The creature stared at the burning structures, savoring the yellow and orange tongues that licked the air, the black vines that gripped the building in a vice, the soft golden glow of the embers that ate away the resilient gray remains, and the scorched bones that were strewn across the ground, snaking between the buildings. But just as it became entranced by the tongue's dance, the world started to become that boring shade of crimson again. Annoyed, the Contree started to clamber down the frame with dark orange flakes falling with it. The creature made sure not to wake the others sleeping in the rubber rectangle below the frame as it scurried along towards the city in flames. Its emaciated bird-like appendages carried the Contree along the roads as it passed buildings it already ransacked. This led the creature to unfamiliar territory as it explored the burning buildings in the heart of the city. On a stable floor in one of the buildings, it found small caves made of what seemed to be the same material as the frame it slept in. The caves were just big enough to fit the creature if it curled and hunched into its usual sleeping position. Just as the Contree was testing this and getting cozy, its hunger commanded it to keep moving, so it abandoned its potential shelter, taking note of its location for further use. The next structure had caught the creature's eye from a mile away. The walls were not like the others, for they rolled like the hills that surrounded the massive buildings. Some walls swayed back and forth and formed shapes that the creature had never before fathomed. Inside the building, the walls bulged out and made the Contree feel as if he were underneath the hills it saw every day. The room was immense and empty. The floor was covered in burnt canvases and shattered marble, remnants of a time long gone. The walls were barren, except for the large, square canvas in the corner that caught the creature's attention. The sides appeared to be frayed, but other than that, the front seemed to be well intact. Even through the bandage, which had now turned slightly gray from the ash, the Contree could tell that the object was coated in a myriad of colors splashed across the canvas. Some of the shades even looked new to the creature, which caused its whole being to shake with excitement. Almost instinctively, its claw grabbed the bandage just above its mouth, preparing to peel it off, but then it stopped, for fear of the pain it would bring. Just then, a dry crunch, followed by the soft pattering of footsteps outside, alerted the creature. It bolted through the wide hole in the wall it entered and scanned its surroundings once it was outside. Almost immediately, it spotted the rear half of another Contree entering a building. It followed after it, leaping up the stairs, listening to the hard crunches and the dry smacking of lips of the Contree just above. Finally, it reached the goal. Two small Contrees, clearly children, were hunched over a decaying, flame-caressed warrior and devouring it. The one on the left was coated in ash, the bandage almost entirely blackened. The other one had patches of short fur that covered its torso burnt away, revealing craters of bubbling gray flesh surrounded by a black sea of fuzz. They did not take notice of the newly arrived Contree, as it tore through the warrior's remains. Most of its fabric and flesh had burned away, and the meat smaller Contree went after turned into ash in their long jaws. Still, they were enraptured by the feast. The children did not even take notice to the adult as it dug through the flesh with its long, slender claws and yanked out a large bone from the warrior's leg. It used its long jaw to break the bone, licking and sucking out the marrow from the pieces. After a while, the children started to take notice and use this technique, but by then most of the bigger bones had been cleaned out. The warrior had now become a scorched, deflated mass of flesh, and the building began to give way. It began with a deep, faraway groan, followed by a sharp jolt that shifted the feasting party. The creatures halted their harvest and turned their gaze skywards. They swore they spotted movement in the seemingly endless tower above, but the flames' dance obscured their vision. A flat, gray boulder with black scars careened into the adult's view, and instinctively it leapt backwards. Black, viscous liquid splattered across the adult's body before it touched the ground. A severed arm in front of the robo convulsed from mindless, contracting muscle. There were no screams, no cries for help, not even whimpers of pain, just the sound of black juices evaporating into dry, ash-strewn air. That and the thunder of the building released as it began to fall. Without hesitation, the Contree leapt down the stairs and galloped across the floor, which grew steeper by the moment. Metal caves slid towards it as falling rubble became more frequent. But the Contree swerved through the obstacles and rushed towards the remnants of a window, finally leaping through. It crashed and tumbled into the concrete building below, rolling and picking up all the ash it touched like putty. The creature lay there, taking in ash through deep, rattling breaths. Above, the sky began to darken as a massive hand fell towards it. The Contree turned its gaze to the side and saw the connecting arm. It then flipped over, bracing for the impact that never came. Eyes peeled open from the shock of not being dead, and gazed downwards upon a vast abyss, with stars sprinkled throughout. The head of the Contree jolted up through its hands and erratically moved around, taking in its surroundings. Then it stopped. The horrific beauty it witnessed entranced the Contree. Galaxies flared into existence while others dissipated into the ether. And while it did not see it, the Contree knew they were filled with life. Creatures that it could never fathom danced and hunted across fields, ocean, sky, and stars. Beings that were reminiscent of the warriors, built, created, fought, fornicated, and explored. Buildings navigated through the stars and interacted with each other by fighting or just by meeting. Along with all this, it saw what they could be. Every potential, every loss into a victory, every version of the gods, every slight difference that constructed into catastrophic change, every cycle was in front of the Contree's eyes. It knew all of this and nothing of it. The creature then began to notice the others that walked in the same space it currently occupied, but then it was all gone. All of it pulled away like a curtain from the Contree in a blink of the eye. And it sat there, inhaling the ash of the crimson and gray landscape. An enormous muscular arm drew away from the creature, never breaking stride, as if it had merely crushed a speck of dust. The entire body of the roaming creature used to be a mass of pure muscle, with eyes lining the off-warrior body, replacing the tendons and ligaments. Now they are wispy outlines of a god that once had a spot in the minds of living beings. Two mouths were stacked on top of each other, each containing a pair of jaws. Once able to breathe in and out the life that resided in every creature, they were now silenced, never able to garner attention. A dense golden visor that flared into the ground at the back of the head belonged omniscient eyes. No longer could the defeated god utilize that knowledge. The husk lumbered onward, towards a destination it was not sure about. It traversed the land with no regard to its surroundings, no acknowledgement to the other Contree who, even after all this time, still feared getting in its path. The dumbfounded Contree watched the titan fade into the distance, and finally began to move. Slowly, but with purpose, the creature made the arduous journey back home, back on top of its metal frame, where it fell into the deepest slumber any Contree had ever experienced. Excitement coursed through the Contree's lanky frame, causing the removing of the bandages to become tricky due to trembling hands. Slowly, the blackened bandage peeled off, circling the head. A waterfall of crimson liquid cascaded from the face, forming a pool around the hunched legs. For the first time, the Contree did not shriek in agony. It grimaced in pain, surely, but it never experienced this level of tranquility during the changing of the bandage. It applied the new bandage to the head and once finished, finally opened its eyes. The unbelievable, vibrant colors of the painting filled the Contree with euphoria. But unlike the previous feelings of delight, this one evolved. Serenity had taken over as the creature sat there. Ash piled around it. The building eventually crumbled, but refused to touch the creature and its muse. The Contree refused to move, and eventually withered away with time. Hey, thanks for listening. Remember, if you have an original short story or work of fiction and want to submit it, send it to storytellercasts@gmail.com. Again, that's storytellercasts@gmail.com. Casts with an S at the end. Good night, everybody.